Last month, I was in a team meeting where everyone was bringing ideas for a new project. One team member, let's just call her Jamie, mentioned an approach that no one seemed to acknowledge, and the conversation just continued. 15 minutes later, I kid you not, another team member suggested basically the same idea, and everybody loved it. I actually watched Jamie's face as she realized what had happened. Later, when I asked her about it, she said, "I'm used to it. Nobody actually listens to me in these meetings." That hit me hard because I realized that I hadn't truly listened to her either. I mean, I heard her words, but I wasn't really present. And that moment made me wonder, how many brilliant ideas, solutions, or connections are we missing because we have actually forgotten how to listen? Hey there, friends. Welcome to Lead with Soul, the podcast for women leaders who are done with overcomplicating our success. I am your host, Meghna. Today we are diving into something that might seem a little basic, but it is actually a superpower in disguise: the lost art of listening. See, we talk a lot about communication skills for leaders: public speaking, writing compelling emails, giving feedback. But what about listening? Somehow we have come to associate leadership with talking, directing, being heard, but not with the quiet power of truly hearing others. And I get it. In a world where everyone is fighting to be heard, where social media has us all broadcasting rather than receiving, where influencer is a career goal, listening can sometimes seem passive, almost like you're not doing anything. But what if I told you that listening, real, active, present listening, might be the most influential leadership skill you are not practicing? Think about the best leader you've ever worked with. I bet one of the things that made them great was that you truly felt heard when you spoke to them. Am I right? Here's what we are going to explore today: why listening has become a lost art. Spoiler, it's not just about smartphones. We're going to talk about the 5 levels of listening and which one actually creates connection. We will also dive into how to detect what's not being said, which is the real leadership superpower, practical techniques to become a leader who listens, and how to create a culture of listening in your team or business. Because here's the truth. When you master the art of listening, you don't just hear words, you uncover solutions. You build trust and you create the kind of loyalty that no amount of charismatic speaking can ever achieve. Let's start by understanding why listening has become such a lost art, especially in leadership contexts. See, the obvious culprits are our devices, right? The constant distractions that they bring. Now, studies have shown that the average person checks their phone 96 times a day. That is once every 10 minutes. What? Each of these checks represents a broken opportunity for deep and active listening. But the problem goes deeper than the technology. We are living in what I call an output culture, where your value is measured by what you produce, by what you say or what you do, not by how well you receive, process, or understand. I noticed this in myself a few years ago during client meetings. I realized I was listening with an agenda, not to truly understand the clients, but to spot opportunities where I could jump in with my expertise of solutions. I was listening to respond. I was not listening to understand. And then one day a client called me out on it. She said, "I feel like you're just waiting for me to finish so you can tell me what I should do rather than really hearing what I'm trying to say." Ouch. She was right. I was doing that thing we all do sometimes. nodding along while mentally preparing my response, thinking about how I could add value. Or worse, half listening while subtly checking my notifications. That wake-up call changed how I approach listening, not just in my business, but in every relationship. Now let's talk about the 5 levels of listening and which one actually creates connection and results. Because not all listening is created equal. Level 1, non-listening. This is when you're physically present, but mentally you're somewhere else. Your eyes might be on the person speaking, but you're thinking about your to-do list, the email you have to respond to, what you're going to say next, or the weird thing that happened earlier today. Signs that you are in level 1 include having to ask people to repeat themselves, realizing that you have just been nodding along but have no idea what was just said, feeling relieved when you can check your phone, or internally disagreeing before the person has actually finished their point. We all slip into level 1 sometimes, but if this is your default listening mode as a leader, you are missing critical information and opportunities to connect. Level 2, selective listening. This is when you tune in only for specific information, like when you're scanning for keywords that may be relevant to your interests, or if you're waiting for the important parts. It sounds like, oh, just give me the highlights, or cut to the chase. What's the bottom line here? Selective listening has its place in some contexts, don't get me wrong. But as a primary listening mode, it sends a clear message. Most of what you're saying does not matter to me. Level 3 is analytical listening. At this level, you're fully hearing the words and you're processing them intellectually. You're analyzing, evaluating, comparing to what you know, and you're forming judgments about that content. This is where many leaders camp out, especially those that have an analytical background. You're absorbing that information, but primarily to assess it rather than to connect with the person who's sharing that information. Now, signs of this could include mentally sorting information into agree and disagree piles. If you are immediately thinking about potential flaws or problems, if you are focusing more on the content than on the person you're speaking. Then level 4 is your empathetic listener. Now is where we're getting into the good stuff. Empathetic listening is when you're not just hearing words, but you're also tuning into emotions, body language, and the meaning behind what is being said. In empathetic listening, you are asking yourself, how does this person feel about what they're sharing with me? What in all of this is important to them? And what might they need from this entire conversation? This level is what creates the real connection, because people feel not just heard, but they feel understood. In level 5 is generative listening. This is the highest level of listening. It is also the rarest. Generative listening is when you are fully present without an agenda, and you're creating space for something new to emerge. In this type of listening, you have temporarily set aside your own perspectives and solutions. You are listening for possibilities that neither of you may have seen before. You're willing to be changed by what you hear. You're tuned in not just to what is being said, but to what wants to emerge, what wants to be said. This is where the magic happens. Generative listening is what allows the leaders to hear things that might contradict their current thinking, to discover blind spots, and to co-create solutions with their teams that no one person could have ever developed alone. I personally experienced the power of generative listening during a very difficult time in my business. I was facing a challenge that had me completely stuck. And during a mastermind session, one of my mentors simply held space for me while I processed out loud. They didn't offer solutions or they didn't try to fix anything. They just listened with complete presence. In that space of being truly heard is where I found my own solution. It wasn't something they suggested. It emerged from feeling safe enough to explore all angles of the problem without any judgment. Now let's talk about what I consider real leadership superpower. Hearing what is not being said. Because here's the truth. In most professional contexts, people are not transparent about their thoughts, their feelings, or their concerns. There are things that go unsaid due to power dynamics, a fear of conflict, cultural norms, or simply just not having the right words. As a leader, your ability to detect these unspoken elements can be the difference between surface level interactions and transformative conversations. Here are some clues that will help you hear what's not being said. Number 1, body language disconnects. When someone's words say one thing, but their body language says another, trust the body. It is much harder to control non-verbal cues than verbal ones. Look for tension in the face or the shoulders while saying, I'm fine. Crossed arms or physical distancing during what's supposed to be a collaborative discussion. Lack of eye contact when expressing agreement, or a forced smile that does not reach their eyes. Number 2 is emotional undertones. Emotions often leak into tone even when the words are carefully neutral. Listen carefully for a flat effect when discussing something that should actually have emotion. Clipped or overly formal language from someone who's usually very casual. Nervous laughter when discussing serious topics. Or unusually fast or slow speech patterns. Number 3 is pattern interruptions. When someone deviates from their normal communication patterns, something significant is often beneath the surface. Notice, is there a typically vocal team member who's suddenly quiet? The usually direct person who becomes vague? The team member who normally disagrees openly but is suddenly agreeable? Changes in communication frequency. The client who suddenly emails more or less often. Number 4 is conspicuous omissions. Sometimes what is most important is what is not being mentioned. So pay attention to topics that seem relevant but they're deliberately avoided. Names or projects that don't come up when they logically should. Questions that go unanswered or, worse, get redirected. Parts of your question or comment that don't receive a response. Let me give you an example of what hearing what's not being said. See, I was working with a client on her team dynamics. During our discussion, she mentioned every team member by name, their contributions, except one. And when I gently pointed this out, she sighed and admitted there was an ongoing conflict that she had been avoiding addressing. That conversation is what opened the door to resolving a significant issue that was affecting the entire team's performance, but it would have remained hidden if I hadn't noticed that omission. Now let's talk about practical techniques so you can become a leader who truly listens. Because like any other skill, listening can be developed with intentional practice. It's a muscle, just like any other. Technique number 1, the 3-second rule. Most of us jump into respond the millisecond someone finishes speaking. If we even wait that long, right? Try this instead. When someone finishes speaking, silently count to 3 before responding. What this simple pause does is powerful. It ensures that the person has actually finished their thought. It gives you time to absorb what was said rather than just reacting. And it signals to the other person that you are actually giving weight to their words. I started practicing this in team meetings and client meetings, and the difference was immediate. People shared more. They went deeper with their thoughts, and often they answered their own questions during the space that I created. Technique number 2, the clearing practice. Before important conversations, take a minute to mentally clear the space. Here's my quick clearing routine. See if it helps you. 3 deep breaths to center myself. A quick mental scan for anything that might be preoccupying me or a distraction. Setting an intention to be fully present for this conversation. Placing my phone face down or away where I can't see it, in another room, in a drawer. This mini ritual actually helps me transition from my internal world to being fully available and present for this person. Technique number 3 is the reflection pause. Instead of immediately offering solutions or sharing similar experiences, try reflecting back on what you heard. It sounds like, so what I'm hearing is, or, hey, it seems like what is most important to you here is, or even, if I'm understanding this correctly. What this does is 2 things. It confirms that you actually understood, and it gives the other person a chance to clarify if needed. Very often they'll build on what they've shared once they feel truly heard. Technique number 4 is curiosity questions. These are open-ended questions. They come from genuine curiosity rather than just from trying to direct the conversation. Some of my favorites are, so what's important about this to you? I can also ask, how are you feeling about that? What would an ideal outcome look like to you? What have I not asked that would be helpful for us to explore? These questions signal that you're not just waiting for your turn to speak. You are genuinely interested in exploring their perspective even more deep. Technique number 5 is the phone stack. For team meetings or important conversations, try this. Everyone, including you, places their phones in a stack in a corner of the table or even outside the room. And I started doing this with my team, and the quality of our conversations immediately improved. Without the constant pull of notifications, we were able to reach deeper insights and make decisions more efficiently. Now, if you're one that works remotely, the equivalent might be closing your email browsers, your messaging apps during video calls, or having a screens down policy during certain parts of your. See, one of my clients implemented these techniques with her executive team, and the results were outstanding. Their weekly meetings, which had previously run over time with very few decisions being made, became more focused. They became productive. The team members reported that they were feeling more valued, and so many innovative solutions emerged for problems that they had been stuck on for months. But the most interesting outcome, she said that people initially perceived her as more intelligent and insightful, even though she was actually speaking less and listening more. Let's talk about how to create a culture of listening in your team or business. Because while individually listening skills are powerful, a culture of listening can transform your entire organization. Strategy number 1 would be to model it first, right? As with any cultural change, it starts with leadership. Your team is watching how you listen to them, how you listen to clients, how you listening to other stakeholders, other decision makers, anybody else that is present within your organization. Some ways to visibly model good listening would be to put away your devices, as we've mentioned, ask thoughtful follow-up questions, implement ideas that come from team members, and actually give them credit for it. Admit when you've missed something, admit when you're wrong. Talk about what you have learned from listening to others. Strategy number 2 would be to create listening structures. Build deliberate practices into your team routines that encourage deep listening. Some structures that have worked well for us have been no interruption rounds, where each person gets uninterrupted time we go around the table. Designated devil's advocate roles that rotate among team members. That's a fun one to have. Regular retrospectives focused on what is working and what's not. Anonymous feedback channels for concerns that people may not want to voice directly. And then reverse mentoring, where leaders explicitly listen to the more junior team members. Strategy number 3, reward what you want. Recognize and celebrate good listening when you see it. This might look like acknowledging a team member who is building on others' ideas, highlighting instances where listening led to a better outcome. Include listening skills if you're one that does performance reviews. Promoting people who demonstrate exceptional listening abilities. And of course, telling stories that center around listening as a valued skill. It's important to also create psychological safety. People are not going to share their true thoughts if they don't feel safe. And some ways to build this is A, respond non-defensively at any feedback that is directed towards you. Protect people who raise unpopular but important perspectives. Address interruption or dismissive behavior immediately. Be vulnerable about your own mistakes and learning. Demonstrate that good ideas can come from anywhere in the organization and not just from management or leadership, right? Another strategy would be to teach listening skills explicitly. Hey, don't assume that everybody knows how to listen effectively. Consider training sessions on active listening techniques. Consider discussion of different listening levels and when each is appropriate. Role playing, super important, so that we can practice difficult conversations. Feedback mechanisms specifically about listening behaviors. Resources, books, podcasts, articles about effective listening. Let me share how this has played out in my own business. See, when I first started building my team, I was frustrated by misunderstandings and repeated conversations. I assumed people weren't paying attention or they didn't care enough to remember details. Then I realized that the problem wasn't them. It was the listening culture I had unintentionally created. I was always in a rush. I was multitasking during conversations and I was sending mixed messages about priorities. So I made some changes. I scheduled proper onboarding conversations with no distractions. We implemented a no devices policy for team meetings. I created clearer documentation to support verbal communications, started asking more questions, and I've learned not to assume. I explicitly told the team that we needed to work on improving our listening culture. And the transformation was remarkable. Not only did the misunderstandings decrease, but team members actually started sharing more innovative ideas. They started giving more honest feedback and they started to solve problems collaboratively rather than waiting for my direction. And I've seen similar transformations with clients. A healthcare leader that I work with implemented listening rounds where she simply sat with different team members and there was no agenda other than to hear how things were going. It was a check-in of sorts. The insights that she gained helped her identify and remove several of the major workflow obstacles that they were having and that was causing burnout. Another client in the tech space actually created solution circles where team members could bring problems to the group. And the rule was that the group could only ask questions for the first 15 minutes. No solutions were allowed. And this forced a deeper understanding before everyone jumped into fixes. And what this did was it resulted in more innovative approaches to persistent challenges. Here is what I have come to believe. In a world where everyone is talking, listening is your competitive advantage. The leader who truly listens makes fewer costly mistakes based on assumptions. They build deeper trust, loyalty. They discover innovations and opportunities that others might be missing. Their teams are ones where people feel valued and just know that they're there to make better decisions based on complete information. More importantly, leaders that listen create space for diverse perspectives to be truly heard, not just technically included, but meaningfully incorporated. Now, before we wrap up for today, I wanted to acknowledge something super important. Deep listening isn't always easy. It requires us to set aside our ego, to set aside our need to be right. We need to be comfortable with silence and uncertainty. We need to stay present when what we're hearing is challenging. We have to learn to manage our own emotional responses and sometimes prioritize understanding over efficiency. But these challenges are precisely what make listening a leadership superpower rather than just a basic skill. Anyone can talk at people. Far fewer people can create the kind of listening space that transforms teams and organizations. This week, let us all practice the 3-second rule in our next 3 conversations. Let's identify one meeting where we can implement a devices away policy. Ask someone you trust for feedback on how you listen. Notice if you're listening at level 1 or 2, intentionally shift into level 4 or 5. Pay attention to what's not being said in an important relationship. Hey, thank you for joining me for today's episode of Lead with Soul. Now, if you are listening to this while scrolling through Instagram or checking email, first of all, I see you. Been there, done that. Second of all, maybe try listening to this last part with your full attention, just so you can experience the difference. Come find me on Instagram at Meghna_Dassani, where we can continue this conversation about the lost art of listening. I'd love to hear what technique you're going to try next. Until next week, remember, your attention is one of the most valuable gifts you can give as a leader, at home or in the workplace. Choose wisely where you direct it.